What makes a life truly worth living? For millennia, we've searched for answers in temples and battlefields, in silent meditation, and in the roar of rebellion. Today, two giants collide: Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic Emperor who ruled with reason; Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher who shattered every rule. One finds meaning in virtue and self-mastery, the other in struggle and self-creation. By the end of this duel, you'll feel which one speaks to your soul. This is the philosopher's duel. He never asked for a throne. Marcus Aurelius was born into privilege, yes, but not into ambition. He was a quiet child drawn not to the sword or the stage, but to books, to thought, to philosophy. He studied under the greatest minds of his time, not to dominate the world, but to understand it. Then fate intervened. At just 17, he was adopted by the reigning emperor Antoninus Pius, chosen not for power, but for character. The boy philosopher became heir to the Roman Empire, and when the crown eventually passed to him, Marcus inherited not peace, but chaos, war on the frontiers, a devastating plague, corruption in the Senate, rebellion from within his own household. He ruled during one of the most turbulent times in Roman history, and yet he never used his power for revenge, never chased glory, never clung to the role he'd been given. Instead, he turned inward, to a simple, leather-bound journal he wrote in by lamplight, a private refuge, a place to remind himself day after day of what mattered. Do not waste time on what you cannot control. Be tolerant with others, strict with yourself. These were not proclamations to the people. They were conversations with his own soul, because Marcus knew what few rulers ever do, that a man can command an army, but still fail to conquer himself. He wasn't a philosopher who became emperor. He was an emperor shaped by philosophy, and that's what makes his story different. He didn't seek power. He endured it. He didn't use his rule to indulge desire, but to practice discipline. Every decision, every hardship became a test of his beliefs, and there were many. He buried 8 of his 14 children. He spent years on freezing battlefields. He was betrayed by his most trusted general, and even by his own son.
Suffering not as punishment, but as practice. To him, life was not meant to be easy. It was meant to shape you. So he wrote, not to impress the world, but to survive it. His meditations, never meant for publication, have become one of the greatest philosophical works in human history. They are not lofty theories. They are reminders, tools, anchors, because behind the marble bust and the golden laurel was a man wrestling with the same things we all do: fear, grief, temptation, doubt. And in those battles, Marcus Aurelius proved something rare, that real strength isn't found in command, but in restraint. He ruled the world, yes, but more than that, Marcus Aurelius ruled himself. To understand Marcus Aurelius, you must first understand what guided him. Stoicism is not the absence of feeling. It's the art of not being ruled by it. At its heart, Stoicism teaches a simple, brutal truth. You cannot control the world. You can only control how you respond to it. Marcus returned to this truth again and again. In his journal, in battle, in grief. He reminded himself, and now us, that most suffering doesn't come from reality, but from our reaction to it. The Stoic sees chaos and chooses calm, sees insult and chooses silence, sees death and chooses acceptance, not because they're indifferent, but because they refuse to be enslaved by what they can't change. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. For Marcus, that strength wasn't abstract. It was tested daily. During a brutal campaign along the Danube, his army was exhausted, his enemies relentless. Food was scarce, disease was rampant, and still, he made time to write, to reflect, to return to himself, because the Stoic knows your mind is your last fortress. If that falls, all else follows. He built what he called the inner citadel, a place no enemy could conquer, no suffering could shake. That citadel was built on 4 pillars: wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. Not just ideals, but habits, daily practices, the real work of living. He practiced restraint when insulted, compassion when betrayed, clarity when fear threatened to take hold, and when his children died. One after another, he didn't collapse. He grieved, yes, but without bitterness. He reminded himself, everything is borrowed, even love, even time. You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. This was not pessimism. It was precision. Marcus wasn't trying to numb himself. He was trying to wake up, to live fully, to live intentionally, to stop wishing the world would bend to him, and instead bend himself to what the world demanded. To the Stoic, virtue is the only true good. Not pleasure, not wealth, not even survival, but character, because what you are is the one thing no one can take from you. Not emperors, not mobs, not fate. This is why Marcus endures, not because he avoided pain, but because he stood inside it and did not flinch. 2,000 years have passed, and still people turn to Marcus, not because of his power, but because of his clarity. In boardrooms, locker rooms, and battlefield tents, his words are whispered like armor. Athletes quote him before the final match. CEOs study him before high-stakes decisions. Soldiers carry meditations in their packs like scripture. Why? Because the world hasn't gotten easier. It's only gotten louder. We are flooded with opinions, distractions, demands, and somewhere in the chaos, we're expected to know who we are, what matters, what to do next. Marcus didn't offer answers. He handed us a compass. If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it. There's a reason Stoicism has quietly resurfaced, not in ivory towers, but in podcasts, journals, and morning routines. We crave simplicity, focus, a way to think clearly when everything around us is spinning. And Stoicism delivers, not with comfort, but with control. It tells you, you don't have to respond to every insult. You don't have to chase every trend. You don't have to fear the future, because you've trained your mind to meet it. In a culture obsessed with image, Stoicism is substance. In an age of outrage, it's calm. In a world driven by ego, it's restraint. Marcus teaches that your most heroic act is not dominance, it's discipline. He never claimed to be perfect. In fact, he constantly reminded himself of how often he failed, how easily anger or pride could take hold. That's what makes him real. He didn't preach from above. He wrestled with life just like us, but with the tools to do it wisely. And those tools are timeless. Every time you pause before reacting, every time you journal through uncertainty, every time you choose principle over popularity, you are living what Marcus lived. Stoicism, at its core, is not about suppressing emotion. It's about putting emotion in its rightful place, beneath reason, not above it. In that, it offers something radical. Peace that doesn't depend on circumstances. Strength that doesn't depend on victory. Because for Marcus, a meaningful life isn't built on outcomes. It's built on character. Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one. That is his challenge. And his invitation. To stand firm in a world that wavers. To act with purpose in moments of pain. To live as if virtue, and only virtue, is what defines you. And in doing so, to become not a king of others, but a master of yourself.
Refused to stay quiet. Friedrich Nietzsche entered the world sickly and soft-spoken, plagued by migraines, nausea, and isolation. A boy who spent more time in books than in company. His father died when he was 4, his brother when he was 6. He was raised by women, by silence, and by grief, but inside that frail frame burned something dangerous. By 24, Nietzsche was a professor of philology, a prodigy in ancient languages. But the more he studied the classics, the more he began to see their decay. Religion, morality, society. He called it all a scaffolding of lies, built not to elevate humanity, but to tame it. And Nietzsche didn't want to be tamed. He rejected the comforts of academia. He walked away from his career. He wandered the Alps alone, scribbling thoughts like lightning, sharp, erratic, unsettling. He didn't write to be understood. He wrote to expose. To him, Western philosophy had become a cathedral of cowardice, built on borrowed virtue, blind obedience, and the fear of chaos. And so he picked up a hammer, not to destroy everything, but to test, to strike against the idols of his time, Christianity, democracy, morality, and listen for the hollowness within. God is dead, he wrote, not as a boast, but as a diagnosis. He saw a world that had outgrown its faith, but hadn't found the courage to replace it. In Nietzsche's eyes, modern man was adrift, clinging to inherited beliefs, afraid to look into the abyss. He called this herd morality, safety disguised as goodness, obedience dressed up as virtue. But what is virtue without challenge? What is truth without the risk of being wrong? Nietzsche's life was not lived in comfort. He suffered chronic illness, madness, rejection. His books were mocked, his ideas ignored. Yet he wrote with the conviction of a prophet and the fury of a man who saw too clearly. He didn't want followers. He wanted fire. I am not a man, he said. I am dynamite. He believed the world didn't need more rules. It needed more courage. Not more systems, but more souls willing to break them. And so he shattered every certainty he could touch. Not to leave us in ruins, but to challenge us to build again. To stop inheriting meaning and start creating it. While Marcus sought peace in the storm, Nietzsche was the storm. He didn't whisper comfort. He demanded transformation. And in the darkness of exile and obscurity, with no audience but himself, he struck the first blow. The philosopher with a hammer had begun his demolition. What drives a person to keep going? Not just to survive, but to rise, to transcend, to create, even in the face of agony. For Nietzsche, the answer was not God, not peace, not virtue. It was power, not the power to rule others, but the power to become yourself. He called it the will to power, the deep, primal force behind all human action. Not the will to comfort, not the will to safety, but the will to overcome. To take pain and turn it into strength. To take chaos and forge it into meaning. To take a shattered life and build something no one has seen before. Where others saw suffering as failure, Nietzsche saw it as fuel. That which does not kill me makes me stronger. He believed that everything beautiful, everything lasting, art, invention, greatness, is born not in peace, but in pressure, not from avoiding struggle, but from leaning into it. This is why he attacked what he called slave morality, the value system that praises meekness, humility, obedience. He saw it as a morality born of weakness, created by those too afraid to assert their will. Be small, it whispers. Be safe. Be good, even if you are miserable. Nietzsche's answer? No, he didn't want good men. He wanted creators, destroyers of old truths. The Übermensch, the Overman, was his vision of the future human, one who doesn't inherit meaning, one who makes it. This Overman walks alone, not because he's arrogant, but because no path exists for him yet. He is the path. He shapes himself, hammer in hand, chisel in soul. Pain is not his punishment. It is his proving ground. Contrast this with Marcus Aurelius. Marcus endures pain with grace. Nietzsche transforms it with fire. Marcus accepts the world as it is. Nietzsche dares to remake it. And yet, both crave mastery, One of the self, the other of possibility. For Nietzsche, to live well is not to find peace, but to dance on the edge of chaos. He who has a why to live can bear almost any how. That why, that purpose, must come from within. No gods, no dogma, no handrails. It is a terrifying freedom, but a necessary one. Because to live by borrowed beliefs is not to live at all. It is to be acted upon instead of acting. It is to be ruled by fear instead of rising through it. And so Nietzsche challenges you. What if your suffering isn't a curse, but a question? Not why me, but what now? The will to power begins where comfort ends. What happens when the old truths die, but nothing rises to take their place? That's the world Nietzsche saw coming. A world where tradition fades, religion loses its grip, and meaning isn't handed down anymore. But Nietzsche didn't mourn this. He welcomed it, like thunder tearing open the sky. Because where others saw crisis, he saw opportunity. The desert grows, he wrote. Woe to him who hides the desert within. In a universe without guarantees, Nietzsche didn't offer comfort. He offered creation, not the kind you're taught, but the kind you earn. Through pain, through rebellion, through the fire of becoming. This is why Nietzsche speaks so loudly today, even louder, perhaps, than he did in life. In a world drowning in noise, pretense, and curated identities, his voice cuts through. Become who you are. Sounds simple, but it's the hardest thing you'll ever do. Because to become yourself, you have to burn the map. You have to walk alone. You have to say no, not just to the world, but to the parts of yourself that crave its approval. Artists, founders, visionaries, outsiders, they live this. They know what it means to create meaning from nothing, to bleed for a vision no one else can see, to be called mad before being called right. Nietzsche didn't just write for philosophers. He wrote for the ones who refused to settle, the ones who would rather face chaos than live a lie. He didn't believe in final answers. He believed in becoming, not a destination, but a direction, not a truth, but a will. That's the will to power. It doesn't dominate others. It masters self-doubt. It doesn't demand perfection. It demands transformation. Every time you reject the easy path, every time you choose creation over imitation, every time you stare into the abyss and do not blink, you are walking Nietzsche's path. But be warned, this road offers no guarantees, no applause, no arrival, just a lifelong duel between who you are and who you could be. Marcus found peace by accepting limits. Nietzsche found freedom by breaking them. One says, live by reason. The other, live beyond it. So now the dust settles. 2 lives, 2 truths, and one question remains.
In the quiet chambers of a Roman palace, writing in the stillness between wars. The other, wandering through isolation and illness, carving his thoughts into the edge of madness. Marcus Aurelius, Friedrich Nietzsche. 2 men who never met, yet who answer the same question in radically different ways. What makes a life truly worth living? Marcus found meaning in virtue, in living with reason, dignity, and calm acceptance of what cannot be controlled. For him, suffering was something to endure, a test of inner strength, not something to flee or fight. You have power over your mind, he said, not outside events. Nietzsche rejected all of it. For him, meaning wasn't found. It was forged in struggle, in creativity, in pain transformed into purpose. He didn't seek peace. He sought transcendence. He who has a why to live, he wrote, can bear almost any how. Marcus teaches us to master the self. Nietzsche demands we go beyond it. One finds harmony within the world. The other challenges the world to rise with him. So now the duel turns to you. 2 visions, 2 paths, and one question remains. Which speaks to you more? The stoic king or the wild rebel? Now it's your turn. Tell us in the comments which philosopher's worldview speaks to your soul, and why. Do you find strength in order, discipline, and self-mastery, like Marcus? Or do you resonate with rebellion, transformation, and self-creation, like Nietzsche? And if you haven't already, subscribe to the Philosopher's Duel.